Thank you for joining me today. It's Brian Gubernick, and welcome to the No Days Off podcast, where we believe that every single day brings a new opportunity to get better. Let's get into today's topic. Today, I'd love to discuss some life lessons and an exercise that I recently went through that I want to encourage every one of our listeners to maybe take a moment, take a day, take a week, or whatever it may be, and run through it themselves. So let me give you some background. Last week, I had our mastermind group in town, our Metrics Masterminds group in town. And one of the homework assignments that was given to the group before they before they arrived here in Scottsdale was to answer the following question. The question was this: as I look back at my most significant losses, my stupidest decisions, and my biggest mistakes, what are the 25 or more most significant lessons I have learned? That was the question that my partner Ben and I gave to our mastermind members for them to take a few months, because that's the distance between our masterminds, they're quarterly, take a few months and assess their business, their lives, their history, and determine what were their most significant losses and dumb decisions and mistakes, and what were the lessons learned. Now, there's a couple of reasons why we ask everybody to do this exercise. First, as I've expressed on this podcast in the past, I absolutely love the book, The Road Less Stupid by Keith Cunningham. And in that book, Keith does a fantastic chapter addressing this exact question as it pertains to his life. When I read that chapter, I thought to myself, and this was a few years ago, I thought to myself, man, I need to go through an exercise just like that. I need to sit back and assess and jot down all of my dumb decisions and mistakes, and there's a lot of them. And I thought to myself, I need to do this for a few reasons. Number one, yes, I want to acknowledge the lessons I've learned. And I also, number two, want to make certain that I ideally never repeat the mistakes again. But number three, and maybe most importantly for me, and if you know me personally or you've been following this podcast, you know how important this is to me. I want to make sure that I'm leaving my kids with my experiences, my lessons, my trials and tribulations in business and life, and I want to leave it to them so that maybe, just maybe, they one day get to take a look at it. Maybe they don't, and that's okay. Maybe they don't want to see it. Maybe they have no desire, but I at least want to give them the option. I just personally know that had my dad, or if my dad had taken some time to sit down and write his out for me, it would be, or my mom did it, it would be incredibly valuable just to have as a keepsake, if anything. Sure, they could do it today, and it would still be very valuable, but it's a different vantage point than it was in the midst of everything occurring when they were in business years and years back before they more or less retired. And so I want to make sure I'm documenting these things for those that come after me. You know, my daughters and their careers and their families, and maybe there's something to draw from it. So if anything, if you're thinking about doing this exercise, and maybe you don't want to drum up the past because you don't want to review your mistakes, at the very least recognize that somebody else can learn from them. And it may be a very valuable keepsake for the family, something you wish you did, and I certainly don't want you to regret it. So I gave everybody this exercise coming into the mastermind. Ask them to document their 25 or more significant lessons. And I'll tell you, of all the things that we've done in the mastermind over the years, this was one of my favorite exercises to see people complete. I think it was an exercise I think people learned more from than they initially anticipated. And so I'd like to give you an example. I'd like to share with you a lesson that I jotted down, one of the very first lessons I jotted down in my list, and I shared it with the room, and I thought I'd share it with you all today. The lesson is this: the first and biggest step in overcoming a loss or a failure is to dust yourself off and move on. Assess what went wrong, learn from it, but immediately get back into motion. There's no value in dwelling on the past. The faster you can do this, and the faster you can regroup, the faster you'll be back on the right track. It's the first lesson I wrote in my book a few years ago when I started doing this. And it stems from my experience in the last real estate market downturn and crash. I won't go through the entire story, but the bottom line is I was investing in real estate, or thought I was investing in real estate, and the market tanked, and so did my financial well-being. And I was young. I probably thought it was a lot worse than it was. In hindsight, I kind of laugh because I had no responsibilities outside of my condo and my Labrador at the time. But in the moment, I thought life was over. Now, because I was young in both age and experience and naive, I did not know any different but to maybe think about what had transpired, but spend no more than 24 to 48 hours, sulking or feeling bad for myself. And I immediately got back on the horse and got back after it. Now, again, I wish I could tell you like that was an amazing strategy of mine, that I knew to do that and it happened. But the reality is I just didn't know any better. And fortunately, maybe it's upbringing, maybe it was environment at the time, whatever it is, I dusted myself off and I got back in the game. And that's when I started selling real estate for others, and my business career took off. Now, as I looked around the environment at the time, the industry at the time, and as I look back now, 15, 18 years later, what I can tell or what I see or what I know is that so many people in the industry, in the real estate industry, did not dust themselves off. Instead, they stuck their head in the sand, or they crossed their fingers and said, this is going to pass, or I'm not going to have to change, or I'm not going to have to work harder, or whatever it may be. And as a result, many that were in the industry at that time were not in it 2, 3, 4 years later. So the experience I had was this failure. The response was dusting myself off and getting back into it, not dwelling on the past, but quickly moving forward, regrouping and getting on the right track. And in hindsight, as I look back at that, it was the greatest thing I could have done. And again, it wasn't as strategic as I wish I could say it was. It was just the fact that I was inexperienced and naive, but I did it nonetheless. And I've taken that lesson, I've documented it, and I look back at it every now and again because, well, hell, I have failures on a daily, weekly, monthly basis right now. And I've got to remind myself that the biggest step in overcoming that loss is to just get back in the game, dust yourself off and move on. Yes, you have to assess what went wrong. Yes, you've got to learn from it, but you've got to get back into motion. So I share that example for two reasons. Number one, I want to demonstrate for you what it looks like to document a lesson, what the experience was, what you learned from it, why it's important to you. So I want to share with you, the exercise, but I also thought that lesson itself may be one for somebody listening today to hear. So the focusing question for you today as we wrap up, this exercise, if you were to put your 25 plus lessons together and you were to document what you experienced, what you learned, so that you aim to not repeat the mistake and you can pass this knowledge on to others, what would it look like? What would your 25 be? Forget about 25. If you had to just take 3, 4, or 5 lessons and jot them down today, what would they be? Who could you teach them to? Who could you share them with? In addition, the lesson that I shared about dusting yourself off, where might that be applicable in your world? Where are you focused a little bit too much on the past and it's time to get back on that horse and go, right? While everybody else is dwelling, call it what it is. The market has changed. So many people are hoping for it to get better. Let's stop hoping. Hoping's not a strategy. Let's get in the game and move forward and move fast. That's all I have for you today. The No Days Off podcast. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, every single day brings a new opportunity to get better. So let's get after it.